Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Chris Arash Show. And so, how are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good. It's a beautiful day here where we are in Vancouver, and we have an interesting topic today. Do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, not controversial at all. Religion and spirituality.
Let's see how many people we can offend, including each
That's
other.
right. We
Our
shouldn't.
goal is not to do so, but we do like to think and talk about things, and we're gonna get started here. So let's start with definitions. Actually,
That's exactly what I was thinking.
good.
Those very words.
So I'll take religion. Um, I think actually I'm stealing this definition, but Bruce Lincoln, who's a history of religions professor, he should know, I assume. I do think he does. So he describes religion as transcendent ideas, a practice, a community, and an institution.
Was the first one transcendent ideas?
Transcendent, transcendent,
Transcendental?
transcend. Yeah, probably
What are
transcendental
those?
ideas. That's what I noted down. So anything that transcends, let's put it that way, ideas that
Well,
transcend our boundaries. Yeah.
I think that's interesting because that first part points to the potential spirituality ingredient in religion, whereas the rest of them refer to the cultural, and ethical components, right?
But that could apply to spirituality as well in a way, because then you do have a certain practice perhaps in a certain community. So, but then
It's true.
yeah, so can of worms too if we
True.
open that. But that's a definition. My own definition of religion is to have a belief in transcendental belief again, probably in a supreme being or a universe or goddess or whatever you have.
Yeah, I guess for me, when I think of a religion, I think that there's a narrow segment of the population that actually is mining religion for something, for transcendent experiences. So there are those who are truly there for that, and then the 99% of the other people are there for the culture, for the values, for the kind of life guidance. And I think of it, and I mean, again, based on my extensive research, not really, but like just my impression is just when I should mention, like, as I was making notes and everything, I noticed that pretty much everything that I sort of my notes about was about Christianity. Like
Hmm.
I'm not Christian, but that's the one that's most accessible and most known to me. So I just constantly, everything's, well, Christians this, Christians that, and of course that's not everyone. Um, so but I think some of what I'm going to say applies to others as well, just to make a broad sort of generalization. And my experience has been that when I engage in conversation with Christians about their values, their beliefs, and so on, it quickly becomes something like a shared communal, like a community experience. It helps locate their identity in the world, but it doesn't necessarily, and of course it gives them some comfort, like they pray, whatever. But I don't know. I always get the impression that it's like it just happens to be the culture they're in, and the cost of admission is this set of beliefs. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
they didn't go shopping around for, like, oh, I think I'm going to be a Hindu. No, wait a minute. I want to be like a Zoroastrian or whatever. Nah, okay, I'll settle on Christianity. It's like their parents were Christians, their grandparents were Christians, they were born in a Christian household, all their friends are Christian, their community is around the church. That's just the air they breathe. And so and so for them, if questioning it or whatever is, what's the point?
Yeah, it reminds me of the idea of like the club model that they have of like to belong to this club, you might dress in a certain way. There's a certain sacrifice involved. Let's say maybe you have to go vegetarian to be part of this club, and so depending on how much how exclusive they are, the more like special you would feel of belonging to that club. It's like,
Mm.
people aspire for it. And that's kind of an interesting way of seeing it. And that's how you recognize each other. So basically, whether it's the hijab, whether it's the cross, and so on, the Christian cross, so that you can kind of say, oh, you're a member of this club as well,
Right.
which I found interesting, because that creates that community that we are mentioning here as well. And I've been attending lots of talks by Gresham College, and in one of them, there was one that was called the Myth of Secularism, and that kind of reminded me of that as you're speaking, where he's Dr. Usami al-Assami, a Muslim scholar. He talked about how in the West, we are there is not really the separation of church and state that we think there is. It's just replacing them. So the saints would be basically the founding fathers. The Constitution is the sacred scripture. The clerics is the Supreme Court. And when you think of it in that way, you say, well, there is actually not that much of a separation here between the church and the state. And when there are these language, the language, biblical language, if you like, and religious language that goes into the state as well, and politicians, then it becomes confounded as well.
Yeah, but I would say, I mean, I sort of get the parallel, but the big difference is that, I mean, it is the founding fathers and so on are secular in the sense that they're not imbued with magical powers, or
Yeah.
and this is not based on faith. This is based on reason, and this is based on actual principles. So it's not like, oh, there's a God. Really? How do we know? Because there is, and you have to have faith in him. What? And then, the founding fathers, are they real? Yep. We have history books, like it's sort of the triumph of reason over faith, and over, some very anti-reason, anti-scientific, trends in human thought. I mean, that's, I think, for me, the most objectionable. Like, I'll just say, I'm not Christian, and I will say that I don't think it's good for humans to engage in these faith-based communities. I don't think it's healthy I think I see a lot of negative things come out of it. I do understand that it does provide a very solid community. I understand that they build hospitals in Africa or whatever, and all that. But I think at the core, if you're basing things on faith, you're just, on not questioning things. That's a recipe for disaster, as we've seen. And I would also say that, at least for Christianity, it's a storage place for conservative values. It's a place where all the kind of things that for me are not progressive hold us back. That's a great place just to keep them really safe, like, so, they're the last ones to accept homosexuality, and, and having a reasonable discussion about abortion, transgender rights, whatever it is. We know where the Christians are going to land on all those issues.
Yeah, so I think one of the problem is we should see it actually more as a spectrum, and even Christianity, or again any of the major religions. So I do agree with what you're saying at certain base, and it could be a big base, it could be a lot of people, and it could be people that are probably more outspoken than others. But I think there's also a group of liberal Christians who do, and there are, and it's not that I think there are. And so we have to keep that in mind. The same way, it's kind of the fallacy of saying, well, Islam is a religion that is fanatics use it. It's violence, terrorism, and so on. But that is our perception, and it's wrong, because it is, again, a small group of people. And within that religion, there are many who oppose that. Majority actually opposes them. So it's also the idea of misconceptions that we have of certain religious groups. That's why we have so many sects. And I think one of the problems with religion, and I would not consider myself a Christian either, but I'm fascinated by the main character, Jesus, and the Buddha at the same time. I think these are people that we should follow, and we should really listen to what they're saying. But instead, we're going with that club model. It's like, okay, if you want to be in this group, this is what you have to accept. right? So this is our club, and if you don't accept those beliefs, and they tend to be conservative, yes, absolutely, then you can't be part of us. And that, I think, is the problem there. Um, yeah, so it's like, I don't think we should, and to have a community, we should have, I like interfaith, where you can bring in your own personal beliefs, religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, and communicate with each other. I think those are the best, because that's
Yeah.
when you get the full spectrum of, again, different views. Let's look at God Himself, which is something that I've struggled with too. And so the definition of God here, the traditional one again, and it's a very logical one: omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, right? So all knowing and all powerful, as well as all good. The problem of evil was very fascinating for me, because that's something that we have to struggle with then. Why is there evil in the world?
If there's this benevolent God, right?
Yes. If, again, we might not be all knowing. And if you look in the Bible, there are many things that I say, well, he should have known that. Why is he surprised? Why did he not see that coming if he's all knowing? Why did he have to like destroy humanity and get angry if he already knew that was going to come? So that is one thing that baffles me. The idea of also being against knowledge, anti-knowledge, the tree of knowledge, don't eat of it. Why not? Isn't that a good thing?
Right. Yeah,
Right?
I mean, and that's, I mean, with the problem of evil, then we go down the path of free will, and sort of that you can, there's all knowing, whatever, you can choose a path, you can choose to eat from the tree of knowledge, but then you'll be, thrown out of the Garden of Eden and all those kind of things. It's like, that's on you. I didn't say, that's, you could have stayed in paradise, but you had to have the apple, and it's, to me, it's just such a fairy tale. Like, it's just like, what? Like, I struggle with just like, when I mean, I think that there are probably highly intellectual / spiritual Christians. Well, I know there are, who, view these things in a highly, highly metaphorical and poetic light, and I think that's cool. And some of my favorite writers have done that. But, like, most of the time when I, like, one of my experiences I had was, I lived overseas, and I won't even say where, just because I don't want to point fingers at anybody right now. But there was quite a large number of born again Christians who were there to proselytize. Like, that was why they were in that country, and I worked alongside of them. And I didn't think that was a great thing, but I also try to be respectful of their beliefs. But I did like to engage them in conversation. I'd say, listen, you're my coworker. I respect you in general. I'm very curious about what you believe, and so, and I'm no Bible expert, but I did take some courses in uni and in graduate schools. I read around a bit. So, I'd say, listen, let's talk about the Book of Deuteronomy, like, where, pretty clear rules about when to beat your slave, and you can like stone your neighbor if they make noise on the Sabbath. And, it's like, obviously you're not taking these, at face value, right? And, the conversation kind of disintegrated pretty fast, because I had this naive sense that they were invested in really knowing their own religion, and it didn't take long to scratch the surface where we would go from talking about actual, principles and how can this be, and sort of biblical analysis, to the story of how they came to be a born again Christian. And there was some crisis in their life, and the church opened its arms and they welcomed this person in. And as you mentioned before, kind of to be part of that club, here's what we believe. You believe it too, right? Yep, I do. And it was just like, they weren't passionately engaged with those kind of ideas. And I was kind of disappointed in that because it's kind of their life, So, and I'm sure that there might be people who are like, "Whoa, no, that's such a generalization." And I'm not trying to generalize to all Christians. I'm just talking about this experience I had. But I realized that for a lot of people that I couldn't have a straight conversation about it because there was always, I won't say an agenda, but another motive for them to be in the Christianity game, other than I was so turned on by the Bible, or I had some kind of spiritual revelation around the words of Jesus.
Hmm. And I think it's really the interpretation too of the book itself, because there's so much and you can focus on all the different parts and there's contradictions there too. And then do you read it as figurative or as literal? And that's where we would run into issues. But if you see it as a work of literature,
Yeah.
in that sense, we know as instructors too, you can have different viewpoints on it and you can
Oh,
see it in different ways and analyze it in different ways. And it could still be the word of God, if you like. The source could be divine, but then it's how do we use this? And what we see in many cases is people are basically projecting their own violence into it, their own views that, oh, slavery, yes, you can beat them, and so on. So those kind of ideas resonate with them, and that's what they bring to the discussion. And I think there are other parts that are much more important. Again, the history of Jesus and things that he says, and even he contradicts himself. In one point, it's like, yeah, let's be meek and humble, and then in the next one, it's like, yeah, let's get the sword and fight them. So it's like, but I think it's getting to the core of it. And the other thing that I have issues with organized religion is they're taking it so goddamn seriously.
mhm.
And I think religion should be about joy. It's not the idea of suffering that is important, is the idea of Jesus resurrecting and coming to life and existing, that there is an afterlife. But our focus in various forms of Christianity is on the suffering part, and we have to suffer and so on. But why not enjoy? Because when you look at Jesus himself, he had a great time turning water into wine at a wedding. I mean, it's just awesome. He was a cool dude, and I think we miss that. We miss the playfulness in it because it's also so dead serious in many cases.
I guess, but I guess the tradition of Christianity and its aesthetic, in terms of what you go to the Louvre, it's just like, oh my God, how many times are you gonna? Hey, I know I'm gonna do another painting of Jesus and Mary. Oh, that's interesting. Let's do that. Let's just do that. The only subject for how many, thousands of years. But the I just lost my train of thought. But I was going to say, but I mean, I think that's it. Like, there isn't a lot of joy and there's a lot of shame, and so sexuality, shame, right? Like get kicked out of Garden of Eden because, and suddenly we go from, everybody being Adam and Eve and are naked and it's all good, but then they're suddenly ashamed and they're kicked out, and there's a whole idea of original sin, and what a huge burden to put on humanity, or at least Christian humanity, right? Like, what the hell? Like, just to have this yoke of shame and guilt, and what makes us most human is actually somehow repulsive, like sexuality, whatever, something that has to be hidden. Our strongest, most, where our vitality comes from, like, sexual impulses and things like that, has to be, repressed, and it's like, and it feeds so well into building, a good, economy where people have to work very hard. There's a work ethic, component to Christianity, and everybody has to, follow the rules and all of that. It's just a perfect recipe for a repressed, miserable life, I would say.
Yeah, what I see is like God becoming flesh too, and you have that, and so the idea of like, okay, God is represented in Jesus. He is God, who is again Son of God, whatever you want to call that, and so that's kind of entering the human realm and experiencing it. And I love the Wim Wenders movie, Wings of Desire, where the angel becomes human, and
Right.
he's just fascinated by look, color, because before it's all black and white to him, and it's like sensations. I'm drinking a hot coffee on a cold a winter's morning. And so those things we should focus on, we should celebrate. Those are actually what makes us human and makes us alive. And I think that's kind of a segue into, for me, the definition of spirituality, of being attuned to all of those things and not shunning them, or not being bogged down by what you're saying, ideas of sin, or no, this is bad, or I shouldn't drink coffee because it's a drug, and so on. But more like a more kind of like embracing attitude of life, and the good parts of life. Of course, there is a lot of dark side to it, and I think we can maybe, if we have time, we'll get into morality a bit later. But I think that is, for me, the definition of being a part of it, of being spiritual.
I guess I would agree that definitely that is a part of spirituality, but I think there's also, and I'm not saying it's necessarily right or wrong, but within spirituality there's also a kind of transcendence of things like desire and things that define us as human. It may not be the same kind of shame, it may not be a repudiation of that, but there is a kind of moving beyond it. And so if there is some similarities in that respect, but in the same time, there are also like Tantra, which is, really uses sexuality as a spiritual practice. So, that those can kind of melded. But I think there is some key difference here, like, in terms of spirituality versus religion. And I just feel like spirituality is a personal matter, like I think I'm sure the religious would say that they have a personal relationship with their God. So fair enough. But maybe spirituality touches on that as opposed to all of the rules and edicts and cultural norms that arise around those beliefs. So I think that's a useful way to do it. And I think, to me, spiritual is, I guess it should be anyway, kind of following your own path, as opposed to following, whatever you've been born into.
So think for yourself. Would that be something you'd say somebody who thinks for themselves would be spiritual as part of it again?
Yeah. And I mean, think, yes, but I think just maybe guided sometimes even something beyond. I mean, for sure, like then go, do some reading or whatever, but sort of searching for a kind of transcendent experience that isn't necessarily going to be, taking the sacrament or whatever on at mass or something. It's like seeking out some kind of deeply personal experience. I mean, this is, again, very general, very personal definition that I'm imposing on it, but that's sort of what comes up in my mind.
I think it's easier for us to define religion than spirituality, because even like trying to find a definition of it, it's just like, it's not very clear what we mean by that. And my question for you, one of my questions that I had was, does it involve the word spirit? Spirituality has the word spirit. Is that part of your belief system as well? If you would be a spiritual person, would that include spirit, and whatever that means here in this context?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask you about that too. I think that's where you and I differ a little bit, because I don't really have a supernatural view of the world. Like, I'm kind of a materialist, and so, like, I think Buddhism has enormous amounts of value for us, and but it's a very secular Buddhism that is practiced in the West, and
but isn't Buddhism spiritual?
It's spiritual, but I would just say that, like, in some forms, there's reincarnation, for example.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So that's what I mean.
So the idea that, and so that, that's not something I believe in. Like, I don't, except in its most abstract, metaphorical sense. You know what I mean? Like, in the sense of, or karma, for example. Again, yeah, I think that sort of what goes around comes around, for sure, but it's not like a sort of one-to-one sort of sciencey kind of thing. But and when reincarnation, I think even that is like, when you delve into the definitions, it gets really tricky, because it's sort of, because remember, like in Buddhism, there is no self, there is no the self is an illusion. And so how do you reincarnate something that's not, like the idea, like the cartoon version of this is you come back as like some kind of like mule hooked up to like an ox cart because you were bad in this life or something like that, or you're like reincarnated as a cockroach, as some sort of Kafkaesque nightmare. But it's like, it's nothing like that. It's more like energy is sort of being sort of things are happening, certain kind of energetic patterns are repeating because of things that happened before, something like that. It's not like me coming back as some other dude.
I've always the Zen Buddhism, Christianity I was fascinated by as a teen, but then Zen Buddhism came in, and I was even more fascinated by that, and just forgot about Christianity for a while. But one of the things was my misconception of the self when they talk about like, oh, we don't have a self and so on. I think that is, we don't, as somebody who is like studying it and so on, I don't think I fully understood it. And I think I understand it much better now, because the idea of self that we have, that is the illusion part, the illusory part, is that I think, okay, this is Arash, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is, my life here and so on. And that's the only perception of myself. But I think what Buddhism sees is that this is part of it, that there is a self that is bigger than that, which is also me, but this is just a tiny perception of it. One of the most fascinating things for me was when I noticed, after going through basically analyzing myself through by using psychoanalysis and so on, getting to like liberating myself in many ways from many ideas that I had about the self. And then there was a certain moment where I felt like elated, where I felt like, I'm kind of hovering through life. And I get that actually now much more often on a more continual basis. And I was reminded by a Zen quote I'd read that said, well, Satori is when you are hovering above, like a couple inches above the ground, and you go about your life. And then I thought, well, this is the same kind of feeling. And then I found out that Erich Fromm wrote a book on Zen Buddhism and psychoanalysis, basically saying it's the same thing. So, and then that also led me to another thought. It's like, well, what if all of these religions and spiritual practices and so on, the aim is the same, philosophy as well, Western philosophy, to know yourself, but not the self that we are living and accustomed to. It's like a different experience. That's the transcendence, the transcendent part of it, of expanding and in evolving other people too. The circle is much bigger than we think. And that is, to me, the fascinating way of seeing all religions. It's actually exactly the same thing. And we are fighting because we're just focusing on the self, the small self, and not the bigger self. And that's why we have these horrible things happen in the world.
Yeah. And I for sure. And those are all interesting. I don't know if, the majority of followers of any particular religion are grappling with, the illusory nature of the self. But I think, it's sort of, I know for myself, the way I think of it is, I always think of Buddhism as closer to psychology than philosophy, and Descartes sort of, I think, therefore I am. That is Descartes, right? I think
Cogito ergo sum.
And I've heard a lot of people on the Buddhist side sort of say, and that was the first mistake. Like that's where we diverge, because the idea of this solid, defined by the stream of cognition, like I am these thoughts that are in my head, and the whole purpose of meditation is to go, as I've heard it described, behind a waterfall. So, so you get to a place where you can say, I am not my thoughts. The thoughts come and go, and the thoughts are merely reactive to a situation. There are thoughts would be a better way to put it than I am thinking these thoughts, or maybe to say I am being thought by these thoughts, like, or something like that, because it's a kind of emergent self that's not consistent over time. It's just there's angry self because of something that happened, but it feels very solid. It feels like this is who I am. And then later there's regretful self for the carnage that angry self did. And then there's loving self, and then there's whatever self. But it's just like a phenomena that's just happening in the moment, and then poof, it's just ephemera, and then it's gone, and then it does something else. But in each case, it's kind of wrapped in this illusion of consistency. It's like, look, it's like a hall of mirrors. It's like, here I am, Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon self, and I've always kind of been this way. Look back, look on this hall of mirrors. But it's all, you're just looking at a thought. It's a single thought of the past. It's not a real view, and that view of the past will change completely with a different mood or a different whatever.
And this is very interesting because our bodies change, and so I heard like cells, like they every 7 years they
Right.
renew themselves, and of course physically we do change. I used to have more hair, and they're changing color and stuff. But we assume that the spirit part of the mind, or again the thinking part, that it's going to be the same and that we're consistent. But when you look back, and when I look back a few years back, I see like how many changes have happened also in the way of thinking. But I think people get stuck in that cycle of thought, as you're saying. And what I love is the koans that the Zen practice does, is like where you try to solve a riddle that you cannot solve, and you keep trying, and you go and see the master, and your answers like usually don't satisfy them until one day you have a realization. And that is again very spiritual in my view. And when you have that and you walk into the room, the master recognizes that and says, okay, now you got it. But it's not an answer that we can put into words.
Right. And I think, and the famous one is the sound of one hand clapping, for example. And I think one of the ways I've heard the sort of false self described in Buddhism is the conditioned self. It's a self that is simply reacting to a set of conditions, of conditional, inputs, and feels very, oh, that's what that's who I am, and that's, solid, and there's nothing more. But it's merely, well, because I do that because I've always done that, because when stimulus X happens, then response B happens, and so, one of the reasons that people go on retreats, and a retreat, like a meditation retreat, I've never done one. Eventually, I guess I will. I kind of know I have to, and I'm kind of dreading it, but it's not a fun experience. Like, nobody's going to retreat going, oh, that was so fun and relaxing, because it's just you and your mind for whatever, a few days, a few weeks, whatever it is. And what's going to come up is all of that conditioning, which is going to say, you can't just sit here. You have to do this. And you know what? Now that you're actually just sitting here and you're not distracting yourself, remember that thing that you did back in, like 20 years ago? Like, it's going to become this place of all of the layers of the onion are going to come off. And you're going to say, oh, right, and I have this impulse and I have that impulse, and I'm not going to act on it. I'm not going to act on it. And it's just, you're going to keep going, well, who am I if I'm not this set of impulses or that set of impulses? And slowly you do, as you were talking about, like, I think, get that sense of a larger self, which I think at some point for the Buddhists would be a no self, which would be an experience of emptiness, where you're just kind of spacious. There's a meditation called sky-like mind, where you imagine your mind is the sky, and your thoughts and your emotions are like clouds that pass through the sky. And it's like, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's raining, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're happy, whatever. But the quality of the mind doesn't change. And that's what you are. You are awareness. You're just this floating awareness in which stuff happens. And if you can identify more with that spacious awareness and less with the momentary impulse, then you have that broader sense of self. Is at least my understanding.
I see it as work. We need to work with ourselves, and so whether we use meditation or again, what my path that I took, I think it's really important to do that. Now, what you're saying is you can get basically the same through a tool, which is drugs. Certain drugs can give you that. What you're talking about, things can come up then more quickly too. But it's not just the practice of it, because taking a drug does not make you spiritual. And I see it more as these are tools, and then it's really your job of integrating them into your life, of moving in a direction with it, right? And it's not just a practice. And that's like, I know many people who meditate, and many people who call themselves spiritual, who in my view are
Mm.
not, right? And it's not just my perception, it's because they don't embody the good, they don't embody the caring about others. They're just like so like self-concerned, and just like it's actually harming them in many
Mm.
cases to become more self-absorbed. Now, a question for you would be, what do you think, is spirituality something that we can develop and work on? Is it something that we need to be born with? Is it something that uh, comes to us, or is it something that's given to us? How would you say it? Which one of them would you agree with?
I would say it's the sort of a natural preconditioned self. It's kind of, if you stripped away the conditioning, of everything that to do with our
I like
our
that.
upbringing and all
I
of
really
that,
like that.
you strip it back, and that's your
But
sort
that to me is psychoanalysis. That's exactly it. I
of
completely agree with you, 100% on that. But I think where we differ, and I would love to have a show on that, perhaps specifically, but I want to talk about it, is that idea of faith. And again, the way I understand it, probably, or the way faith that does not necessarily include like, oh, in this personal God, and I have faith in this superpower. Actually today I'm wearing a Superman shirt, just kind of to embody that. But more a faith in myself, in the universe, in and myself, as in not the conditioned self. I really like that definition, but the overall self that is not that different from any other self, and that we are part of this whole, that kind of faith. And that, I think, transcends materialism, transcends science in many ways too. I'm not anti-science, but I think there is something that transcends it too. And we see it within science, quantum physics, that is just like playing with it, the idea of gravity, and then how things have changed since Einstein revolutionized with his ideas, the conception of time and so on. I think that's it. And so when you're saying like you have a more materialistic point of view, I would disagree with that. Uh, Basically, also knowing you, because I don't think you do. And I think there is something that's trying to break through. And I would call that faith, even though you don't see it that way.
I the famous Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who
Mhm.
recently died at 95. His word is interbeing. That we don't exist as individual isolated beings. We exist entirely enmeshed and dependent, and resulting from a web of connection that goes through all living things on this planet. And so, he had a very strong environmentalist message throughout his life, which was, don't treat the environment as something that is exterior to yourself. You're not going out to save the environment. You are the environment.
I like
And
that.
and
And
so,
and you are the culture. I mean, when people are saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm fighting against the culture and this," you are part of it. You are
right.
part of the whole, and it's like not seeing yourself separating, but as part of it. The same way we are connected to the environment, as you're saying. I really like that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess in that sense, that's a kind of, more transcendent, view, or broader view of self or existence. Um, Faith is a tricky one. I mean, what's nice about Buddhism is that it doesn't require belief. You know, the Buddha was always all about like, hey, try it. Like, I'm not saying you have to do this, just give it a shot, and so, I like the idea that and I actually, my favorite meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein, he was talking, he's a, intellectual dude from New York, and, but he was first wave Westerners going to India to learn about this, along with Ram Dass and others. And, along the way, of course, he has teachers in India who are talking about reincarnation, and so where he sits with it now is he's not saying he's not saying it's true, he's not saying it's not true. He's like, he just says, like, just sort of sit with the idea, and one of his teachers used to say, Joseph, you don't have to believe this. And then the teacher said, it's true, but you don't have to believe it, And it was sort of like, it's not a requirement to have that kind of blind faith, which is, again, another thing that makes Buddhism so awesome, is that it's such a, sensible, be it, some people don't even want to call it a religion, right? It's a spiritual practice. Or for me, I often just think of it as really, really subtle psychology of the human mind.
Well, I think you can't function without faith, and that's what we do, because we do have faith. You walk down the street, you want to cross the road, you have faith that people will stop at the red light, at their red light, and it's your green light. You have faith in that, and this is just one tiny example, but you can't function without faith. And where it gets tricky is where you have to make decisions based on that. You don't know the answer. You don't have a rational decision there, but you just kind of take that leap. And I think or we can also call it, it's connected to trust also, and trusting yourself, trusting others, becoming vulnerable, because then you have faith or trust in the other person. And in that process, you will have a lot of negative experiences too, because not everybody can be trusted. You can't have faith in everybody. But the main thing, I think, is really that faith within yourself, of being able to connect that. And I think that's what Buddhism is all about as well.
I think for me, my impression is that it's close to that, and except that there's a little bit of a shift to not necessarily trusting that things will work out or whatever, but rather embracing uncertainty. And I think that's
embracing them. I agree, but trusting it will work out. I think it does. I think it always does, and that's
until it doesn't, right? Like,
even if it doesn't, it does, right? I think that's kind of how I would see it.
The word that I've heard used a lot is the experience of groundlessness, where there is no ground. And the way I've heard sort of awakening being described as you suddenly feel like you're jumping out of an airplane without a parachute, and you're falling, which is kind of terrifying, but then you realize there is no ground. You just fall, which I thought was kind of cool. And so, and Pema Chodron is probably one of the big ones on this one, of talking about groundlessness, where sometimes it's when things fall apart in our lives that we are most, in a way, become sort of exposed to the most spiritual part of ourselves. So it's when for Pema Chodron, she's a Buddhist nun who's runs a nunnery. Is that the word? Anyway, she's very famous. But decades ago, how this all started for her was that her husband suddenly left her, and she experienced that groundlessness, where it's just, where's my life? Who am I? Everything's changed, and that sort of led her to meditation and Buddhism as a way of embracing that sense of like just falling through space without any kind of sense of self, without any kind of parachute, and sort of just being able to maybe find some acceptance with it. And so I think for me, it's more like about acceptance and that big word, equanimity, like that to me is like the real payoff, the real value of Buddhism is by holding up equanimity as one of the, kind of best places you want to be as a human being who's just in a constant state of duress, uncertainty. The one I remember, Joseph Goldstein was once quoted again, a meditation teacher who said, if you wanted to sum up all of Buddhism in like one phrase, what would you say? And the answer was, everything changes. That's it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the groundlessness is though a phase. It's not a constant state. I would see it more like, okay, there is that, but again, I do know that I do have that faith that there is like a mattress, a soft one right below. But we need to go through that phase the same way through meditation, where these challenges come up and they're actually good. I think we should welcome them, and
Oh yeah.
same way as embracing suffering to a degree, not looking for it, not actively looking for it. Of course, we're not masochistic, but when it comes to learn from it, to listen to it, and to grow from it, I think that is hugely important.
Oh,
Now, what about? Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, absolutely. I would think, suffering, especially, is such a galvanizer of the self. Like it's not, obviously by definition, not pleasant, but it's going to connect you with you, in the most intense way, that you're going to get a crash course in yourself,
That's when you have to
compared
show
to
what
almost
you're made
anything
of
else.
too, right?
What's that?
That resilience. You have to show what you're made of. That's like resilience, that
Yeah,
strength. It's tested. That's the ultimate
yeah,
test. What I find frustrating is when people just pray. And I know people from a certain religion, which I won't mention, who was saying before an exam. This was during my college years, that she would pray. And so she would do well on the exam. And I said, well, just go and study. That is more effective, scientifically proven. And that's where I would completely disagree with the idea of faith. Yeah, I have faith that I will do well, but I'm not going to do the work. It doesn't work that way.
right,
That's not reality.
right.
But what about atheism? What's your view on atheism? What do you think?
I guess I was a pretty rabid before I got into the whole Buddhism thing pretty heavily a couple of years ago. I would have defined myself as a pretty rabid atheist,
Mhm.
and like Christopher Hitchens to me was
Mhm.
like that to me seemed like a good role model of like somebody who's just
Mhm.
out there ready to take apart anybody who's not going to be sensible about these things. And I guess I just softened on it. I still think that it's great when he does take people on and shows, just like if it's some born again Christian person, he just takes their arguments and turns them into just ribbons. It's just I don't want to dedicate my life to like fighting that. Like
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
rather focus on qualities like compassion, right? And so and that just be made for a more equanimous and saner life ultimately.
In some ways, religion is so much more loaded in terms of words. If you say I'm Christian, I'm Muslim, and so on, compared to an atheist. I mean, people tend to have maybe negative views of it, but the only definition of atheism is no God, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. And what I find fascinating, though, is like when atheists do engage in morality, because they say, even though I don't believe in personal rewards and punishment, I still do the right thing and what's good for myself, for humanity, for everyone. And I admire that because there is nothing to gain for them in their point of view.
Right, exactly. And I mean, and if it is just based on fear, right? Like what kind of vision of the human psyche is it that it's like, well, we're all like just murderers and rapists except for the fear of God's wrath.
Mhm,
It's like,
mhm.
and we would never help anyone else except that the Bible tells us so. And it's like, there is that sort of view that says, the atheist view, that it's like man in his natural state is cooperative and finds it to be the most fulfilling thing is to be of service to others.
Mhm.
That's just built into our DNA. If you want to feel good today, go help somebody else. And it's like I love those like you know psychology experiments where it's like give somebody $20 and it's like go and spend that on yourself. Okay, now how good did that feel? Now take that $20 and spend it on someone else. And
Hmm.
how does that
Hmm.
feel? And it's like
Hmm.
oftentimes, spending it for giving it to someone else or using it for someone else results in a much deeper sense of satisfaction. And so that's just the way that we've been hardwired, and that doesn't require any fear of an angry God.
What about Pascal's wager? What do you think of that? I mean, of like basically betting, if you bet on an afterlife and on God and
Oh
so
yeah,
on,
right. You might as
you
well just
know?
cover all your
Yeah.
bets.
Yeah. What do you think
Yeah.
of that?
I mean, I think that if there's an afterlife, you know, sort of the price of admission probably won't be what we think it is. And I think that's always the test for me. It's like whenever there's anything sort of supernatural or, it's like how I don't, there are forces in the world we don't understand clearly. There's things at play that we don't know about. Quantum physics sort of starts
Hmm.
pointing at those things,
Hmm.
but they don't fit with our wish fulfillment. Like there isn't like,
Hmm.
oh, if I'm really good, then I get to go to heaven, and
Hmm.
that reassures me because fear of mortality is at the base of our existence. So of course we want to have some fairy tale that says you don't really die, but it's like when you have such a clear fear and such a clear made up solution, it's like, doesn't everyone just see through that? Like why would you think that that's real? I just and I sort of wanted to. That's good actually, because I was hoping we could circle back a little bit to organized religion and specifically the Catholic Church. And it's
Okay.
like I just find, you know, there are certain things that come up, in the world, and you're like, I don't understand people, like I just because so many, obviously Catholicism is just got a lot of a lot of followers, and it's just, to me, it's like how can you possibly want to be associated with the Catholic Church in this day and age, considering all that they've done. I mean, hey, we're pretty good, a little bit of child rape, well, actually quite a lot, but other than that we're pretty good. It's like the worst thing, right? Like, and yet it somehow doesn't really discourage people enough,
Hmm.
and I think part of it, though, trying to understand what the appeal might be, is I always think of it as a kind of the way that people are irrational about like rock music. Like you go to like I remember going to a Marilyn Manson show a few years back, and it was like it's very it's very engrossing, and kind of like it just sucks you in and takes you over. Like if you're kind of willing to go with it, and it's not a rational experience. It's this kind of wild sort of Dionysian experience, and I think the Catholic Church offers some of that. Like just in its awesome architecture and pageantry, and all of the sort of theatrics that go along with the body of Christ and all the fancy
Hmm.
costuming. It's like, oh, I'm part of some awesome production here. I'm being taken to another place, just as going to see like some rock show might do it for other people. It's a communal experience. You're just drawn into it, and that it feels literally an elevating kind of experience. So if you want to say that, oh, I felt the hand or the spirit of God or whatever,
Hmm.
sure. But I would say, like, when I went to see Rage Against the Machine, I kind of also had some similar sense, but I wouldn't say that was like God, making me feel sort of high on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the fascinating differences between like the Catholic religion and, let's say, Protestant religion, and again, when you start, Martin Luther didn't like the corruption, and it's like, okay, you're getting away with things, and that's true. This is the mentality of like in the Catholic, through your works you can make up for things. So if you were like a horrible person, yeah, you can atone for your sins, and you're gonna be fine. And I think that's in the back of their mind. It's like, yeah, I can do horrible things, but I'll be okay because I will do good things and will make up for the bad things. Now, the Protestant belief, though, is really scary because God already made up his mind. No matter what you do, you cannot get to heaven. He already knows. He's omniscient and he's made up his mind. So we're just kind of try to live, and then those who are blessed, they will kind of feel it because they will be successful, and those who are not, then because they deserve to suffer and so on. So, and it's and then the only thing you have is faith, of that blind belief. It's like, yes, yes, I believe in him, and then everything is forgotten, even if you're a horrible person. So either one is not that great, because it's like the accountability, the responsibility, the free will, that part, and that your actions matter and have consequences in this life, I think, not just in thinking of the other. And I like the idea of karma for that, because
Mm.
it's like you accumulate that through your bad actions. And I think it does happen. But it's, I do like the part of that belief system of the Catholic religion, that kind of fantasy. I find that fascinating. I find that cool, right? The symbolism and so on. But at the same time, it can be very dangerous, as you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and and I guess sort of again going back to that kind of melding of, or kind of connection between religion and spirituality, it's like I wonder, those that sort of rich pageantry, the rituals of the Catholic Church give people a spiritual feeling, sensation, like to be there. And but I would just say that that's a very different experience than pursuing some larger sense of self through a set of practices like meditation or something like that. Like I just I it's to me, the Catholic Church is so bound up and wound up with all those other things that we talked about, the repression of sexuality, the preservation of conservative values, just sort of the so invested in maintaining its own authority. I mean, the Protestants, one of the reasons they broke away was because the Catholic Church says you don't get to have a personal relationship with God. The church is the intermediary. Like, we'll tell you how things are between you and God. Yeah. And then Protestants are like, no, I can actually just go and read the Bible and develop
make up my own mind and think for myself.
Yeah, and have my own personal relationship with God.
And I think that's it for me, because I see all these aspects that I like, but it's none of them that I say like it completes the whole. Like even Buddhism, there are some parts it's like, okay, no, it's not really the whole answer. And I think probably this is because the way I am. I don't accept the whole package, but I do see the good parts of each of them, and then I combine them and create a hybrid that is my unique worldview. And as long as it's not harming others and it's actually benefiting others, I think that should be fine. And that's something that would other people encourage to do as well, maybe.
And we're getting close to the end, but just if you could even briefly touch on some of the things you feel like aren't working in Buddhism.
Maybe we could do our own show on that, because
maybe that's a kickoff for the next one.
I'm fascinated about, so we can get into that, and that might be maybe our next show. We'll debate that.
We might go a little bit deeper on that, the spirituality side.
For sure. And I do like also to talk about the afterlife, but that again is another show. But thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
It's such a pleasure.
As usual, a delight.
These things. Usual delight. I like to hear that. Yeah, and hopefully thought-provoking. Hopefully you take the good out of it and just omit the bad and ignore it. And again, I think pretty much everything is on a spectrum. Just a final note, I think the holistic worldview of things is really something that I'm passionate about. That could be another talk too, where we should see not just the parts and focus on the parts, but see the big picture of everything, how things fit in. That's for another session. But thank you so much, Chris, for doing this show with me.
And thank you, Arash.
Take care.